The mess hall aboard the warship Void's Edge pulsed with life. Laughter echoed from one end of the compartment to the other, as metal cups slammed against tabletops, and stories of impossible victories grew a little more heroic with every round of drinks. Warriors from 5 different alien civilizations crowded the long tables together, setting aside old rivalries to enjoy a few precious hours of peace, while the ship sailed through the frozen darkness between the stars. They all understood the unspoken truth. The war against the Imperium had shown no mercy, and tomorrow's battle could easily be their last. Tonight they chose to laugh instead of remember. In the far corner of the hall, away from the celebration, sat one man who didn't join in. Danny Vance nursed a battered metal mug in silence, watching the room with tired gray eyes. At 58, the human veteran looked older than the years on his service record. His short-cropped gray hair, weathered face, and countless scars told the story of a man who had survived too many wars to believe in lucky endings. While everyone else celebrated being alive, Danny couldn't shake the feeling that peace aboard the Void's Edge never lasted for long. A pale scar ran down the side of his neck and disappeared beneath the collar of his uniform. He ate his rations slowly and watched the other soldiers without speaking. He was the only human aboard the ship. The Galactic Coalition had only made contact with humanity about a century ago. In the grand scale of the galaxy, humans were still newcomers. Most species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. To them, humans were like children who had just learned to walk. Commander Oz stood at the center of the largest group. He was a nearly 8 feet tall with 4 muscular arms and scales that shimmered blue and green under the lights. His species were known as some of the finest warriors in the galaxy. They had been fighting wars since before humans had discovered fire. Oz held up his cup and grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Let us play a game," he announced. "Each of us will share the most foolish myth from another species. The one who finds the most ridiculous story wins a bottle of wine." The soldiers cheered. This was exactly the kind of distraction they needed. A soldier named went first. He was reptilian-like but smaller, with cybernetic implants covering half his face. They believe that their son is actually a sleeping god. He said they think it will wake up one day and judge them all. Laughter filled the room. A officer named went next. She was tall and thin with silver skin and large dark eyes. Her people were known for their intelligence and their love of knowledge. They believe that the souls of fallen warriors live inside their weapons, she said with a playful smile at Oz. That is why they talk to their swords before battle. Oz laughed loudly. "It is not a myth if it is true. My blade has saved my life many times. It knows me better than my own family." More laughter. Then's expression changed. She pulled out a small device and projected a holographic display into the air above the table. Images appeared. Ancient paintings, old photographs, and text in a language most of them could not read. "But nothing compares to the myths of the humans," she said. The room grew quieter. Several soldiers turned to look at Danny, who continued eating without reaction. They believed in gods who lived on mountains and threw lightning at each other. They told stories of heroes who killed monsters with their bare hands. They believed that warriors could survive journeys through the land of the dead and return to the living. She scrolled through more images. They have stories of men holding off entire armies alone. They believed that love could bring people back from death. They thought their soldiers could keep fighting even after receiving wounds that should have killed them instantly. The laughter started small but grew quickly. Soon the whole room was roaring with amusement. "Look at them," a soldier called out. "Humans can barely survive a fall from their own height. Their bones break like dry sticks. They need to sleep for a third of their lives just to function, and they believed they could fight gods. Their lives are so short." Another soldier added, 80 years if they are lucky. Maybe that is why they invented such wild stories. They needed something to make their brief existence feel important. Oz shook his head, still chuckling. "I have fought beside humans before. They are not bad soldiers, but they are fragile. One good hit and they go down. I once saw a human die from a wound that would have barely slowed down a child." Pulled up more images. This one is my favorite. They call him Hercules. He supposedly killed a lion with his bare hands, held up the sky, and completed 12 impossible tasks. The humans told this story to their children as inspiration. She laughed. Can you imagine a species so weak that they needed to invent stories about being strong? The room exploded with laughter again. Danny set down his fork. He looked up at the holographic display at the image of the ancient hero frozen in light above the table. His expression did not change. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply watched with eyes that had seen things none of them could imagine. Notice the human stillness. There was something about the way Danny sat, something about the way his hands rested on the table, that made uneasy. He had reviewed the human service record when Danny first came aboard, 40 years of combat, 17 survival situations that military analysts had classified as impossible, a list of medals and commendations that filled 3 pages, and yet the human said nothing. What about you, human? Oz called out, his voice friendly but condescending. Do you believe these stories? Do you think your ancestors really fought gods and monsters? Danny looked at the commander for a long moment. The room grew quiet, waiting for his response. I think, Danny said slowly, that people remember what they need to remember. Oz frowned. What does that mean? Danny picked up his fork again. It means that myths are not always about what people wish they could do. Sometimes they are about what people have already done. The commander stared at him, confused. Then he laughed and turned back to his friends. Humans, they talk in riddles, because they have nothing real to say. The laughter resumed. The soldiers went back to their drinking and their games. No one noticed Danny quietly finish his meal, stand up, and leave the mess hall. No one noticed the way his hands trembled slightly as he walked. No one noticed that he stopped outside the door, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath, as if preparing himself for something that had not yet come. Because Danny Vance knew something that the others did not. He knew that the universe had a way of testing people. He knew that the worst moments always came when you least expected them. And he knew that the stories his grandmother had told him as a child, the stories these aliens laughed at, had kept him alive through horrors that would have broken anyone else. The myths were not fantasies, they were instructions. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, something was coming to prove it. The days that followed were filled with more mockery. It became a favorite game among the soldiers of the Void's Edge to quote human myths in exaggerated voices and laugh at how ridiculous they sounded. They would pretend to be the hero Achilles, strutting around with puffed chests. They would act out the story of Odysseus fighting a giant with one eye. They thought it was the funniest thing in the galaxy. Danny ignored them. He went about his duties in the medical bay, treating minor injuries and preparing supplies for the battles that everyone knew were coming. He spoke only when spoken to. He ate alone. He exercised alone. He spent his evenings reading old books on a battered tablet that he had carried with him for decades. The other soldiers did not understand him. Most humans they had met were loud and eager to prove themselves. They talked constantly about Earth, about their families, about their dreams for the future. But Danny Vance was different. He moved through the ship like a ghost, present, but not quite there, as if part of him existed somewhere else entirely. Lieutenant could not stop thinking about him, was a species known for their curiosity and their love of puzzles. The cybernetic implants that covered half his face were not just for combat. They also allowed him to access information faster than any organic brain. He had spent hours reviewing Danny's service record, and what he found there troubled him. The human had fought in 3 different wars. He had been wounded 47 times. He had been clinically dead on 4 separate occasions and brought back each time. He had received the highest honors that human military forces could give, and yet he had never been promoted beyond the rank of corporal. When asked the ship's computer why, the answer was simple. Danny had refused every promotion. He wanted to stay on the front lines. He wanted to stay with the soldiers who needed him most. On the 5th day after the incident in the mess hall found Danny in the training room, the human was practicing hand-to-hand combat against a training dummy, moving slowly and deliberately, each strike precise and controlled. He did not look fast or powerful. He looked like an old man going through the motions of something he had done 1,000 times before. "You are not very impressive to watch," said Danny did not stop moving. "I know the train by fighting each other at full speed. They say that pain is the best teacher." "Pain is a good teacher," Danny agreed, "but survival is a better one." Tilted his head. "I have read your file, human. I know what you have done. 17 impossible survivals. The analysts do not understand how you are still alive." Danny stopped. He turned to face his breathing, even his expression calm. "Luck," he said. "I do not believe in luck." "Then call it something else. Call it stubbornness. Call it fear. Call it whatever you want." Danny wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "What do you want, Lieutenant?" Stepped closer. "I want to understand why you do not defend yourself. In the mess hall, they mock your entire species. They laugh at your history, your stories, your beliefs, and you say nothing. Why?" Danny was quiet for a moment. He looked at with eyes that seemed much older than his years. "Do you know what a myth really is, Lieutenant? A story that is not true." "No." Danny shook his head slowly. "A myth is a story that is more true than truth. It is not about what happened. It is about what it means. The details do not matter. What matters is the lesson." Frown. "I do not understand." "You will," Danny said. "Someday you will understand perfectly. And when that day comes, I hope you remember what I am about to tell you." He stepped closer to close enough that they could see every line and scar on the human's weathered face. "The myths are not about what we wish we could do," Danny said quietly. "They are about what we have already done. Every story of a hero fighting impossible odds, every tale of a warrior who refused to die, every legend of someone who kept going when everything said they should stop. Those are not fantasies. Those are memories." He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Humans are not strong. We are not fast. We do not have claws or scales or 4 arms, but we have something else. We have 10,000 years of learning how to survive, when survival is impossible, and we have passed that knowledge down through our stories." Stared at him. "You really believe this?" "I have lived it," Danny said simply, "more times than I can count." Before could respond, the ship shuddered violently. The lights flickered. Alarms began to scream throughout the corridors, and a voice came over the intercom, speaking in rapid, cybernetic eye translated instantly. "Enemy contact. Raiders. Multiple breaches detected." Des' expression did not change. He simply nodded as if he had been expecting this all along. "It seems the universe is about to give you a demonstration, Lieutenant." The ship shook again, harder this time. Somewhere in the distance, there was an explosion. The lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness for 3 long seconds before the emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in dim red light. "The medical bay," Danny said. "I have 12 wounded soldiers in there who cannot fight. I need to get to them." Checked his combat scanner. His face went pale. "They have breached the lower decks. That is exactly where the medical bay is located." Danny was already moving toward the door. "Then I need to move faster." "Wait," grabbed his arm. "You cannot go alone. They are the deadliest ground troops in the galaxy. A single one of them has killed entire squads. If they reach the medical bay before you do, there will be nothing you can do." Danny looked down at the clawed hand on his arm. Then he looked up at, "Lieutenant, I have been doing the impossible for 40 years. I do not intend to stop now." He pulled his arm free and walked out the door. Watched him go. He thought about the stories he had laughed at in the mess hall. He thought about the myths of humans who fought gods and survived journeys through hell. He thought about the quiet certainty in Danny's voice when he said that the stories were not fantasies but memories. For the first time in his life, felt something he had never felt before when looking at a human. He felt afraid, not afraid of Danny, afraid for whatever was waiting for him in the dark. There were nightmares made flesh. They stood 8 feet tall, covered in thick black armor that grew from their own bones. Their claws could tear through starship hull plating. Their reflexes were faster than any known species in the galaxy. They had been bred for war over thousands of generations, every weakness removed, every strength enhanced. A single warrior had been documented, killing squads of trained soldiers in minutes. 14 of them had breached the lower decks of the Void's Edge. Danny ran through the red-lit corridors, his boots pounding against the metal floor. He could hear the battle raging above him, the screams of soldiers, the thunder of weapons fire, but his mind was focused on only one thing: the medical bay and the 12 wounded soldiers inside who could not fight, who could not run, who would die if he did not reach them first. He arrived just as the first appeared at the far end of the corridor. The creature was massive, its body filling the hallway, its eyes glowing yellow in the darkness. It saw Danny and made a sound that might have been laughter, a deep rumbling noise that vibrated through the floor. Danny did not hesitate. He slammed his hand against the control panel and sealed the blast doors to the medical bay. Then he turned to face the corridor and the monster that was walking toward him. "You do not belong here," the said. Its voice was like grinding rocks. "Step aside, little creature. We want the wounded. Their suffering will feed our glory." Danny picked up a metal bar that had fallen from a damaged wall panel. It was heavy and solid. It was not much, but it was something. "No," he said the attack. What followed was captured by the ship's security cameras. Later, soldiers throughout the fleet would watch the footage in silence, unable to believe what they were seeing. They would play it again and again, looking for tricks, looking for hidden weapons, looking for some explanation for what Danny Vance did that night. They would not find one. The first reached Danny in less than a second. Its claws slashed through the air fast enough to cut a normal human in half, but Danny was not standing where the claws landed. He had moved, not with speed, but with precision, shifting his weight at exactly the right moment. The claws hit the wall instead, and before they could recover, Danny swung his metal bar into the side of its knee. The creature stumbled. Danny hit it again harder. Then he grabbed a canister of emergency sedatives from his belt and jammed it into this open mouth, triggering the release. The chemical was meant to calm panic patients. In the concentrated dose Danny delivered, it hit the system like a bomb. The creature collapsed, choking, its limbs twitching. The second came immediately after. This time, Danny did not have surprise on his side. The creature grabbed him and threw him against the wall with enough force to crack his ribs. Danny felt something break inside him, felt the hot rush of pain through his chest, but he did not stop. He pulled a bone-knitting laser from his medical kit and jammed it into the Psi, triggering it at full power. The creature screamed and released him. The third, the fourth, the fifth. They came one after another, sometimes two at a time. The corridor was too narrow for more of them to attack at once. And Danny used that. He used everything. He used the pipes that ran along the ceiling. He used the flickering lights. He used the doors and panels and every piece of debris he could find. 2 hours passed. Danny was bleeding from a dozen wounds. 3 of his ribs were broken. His left arm was dislocated. He had run out of sedatives, run out of medical tools, run out of everything except the will to keep standing. Charged him. Danny had nothing left. His metal bar had been broken an hour ago. His hands were empty, so he grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it with everything he had. The first hit stunned the creature. The second knocked it down. The third killed it. 4 hours. Danny could barely see. Blood ran into his eyes from a gash on his forehead. He was leaning against the wall, unable to stand on his own, but still blocking the door to the medical bay, still refusing to move. They had stopped attacking in groups. They came one at a time now, more careful, more afraid. They had never encountered anything like this. They had killed thousands of aliens across hundreds of worlds, but none of them had ever faced a creature that simply would not die. 5 hours Danny had made a spear from a broken pipe and a piece of sharp metal. He held it in shaking hands, blood dripping from his fingers. His vision was fading. He could feel his body shutting down, organ by organ, system by system. But behind him in the medical bay, 12 wounded soldiers were still alive. 12 people who had families, who had dreams, who had lives waiting for them when the war was over. He whispered their names. He whispered the names of his children back on Earth, the children he had not seen in 3 years. He whispered the names of every soldier he had ever failed to save, every friend he had lost, every promise he had ever made, and he kept standing. 6 hours after the siege began, The blast doors at the far end of the corridor finally opened. Coalition reinforcements flooded in, weapons raised, expecting to find a massacre. Instead, they found 11 dead scattered across the floor. They found 2 more retreating, wounded and afraid. And they found Danny Vance standing in front of the medical bay door with a makeshift spear in his hands, covered in blood that was both his and theirs, whispering words that no one could understand. He looked at the reinforcements. He saw their faces, saw their shock and disbelief. He tried to say something, tried to tell them that the wounded were safe, that he had kept his promise, that the door had not been breached, but his body had finally reached its limit. Danny collapsed. The last thing he heard before the darkness took him was the voice of a young soldier speaking in a whisper that was almost a prayer. "What is he?" she asked. And somewhere in the back of his fatting mind, Danny Vance smiled. He was human. That was enough. Danny woke up in the same medical bay he had defended. The lights were soft and warm, no longer the harsh red of emergency power. He was lying in a bed, his body wrapped in bandages, tubes running into his arms. For a long moment, he simply stared at the ceiling, trying to remember how to breathe without pain. The room was full of people. He turned his head slowly and saw them, and others standing along the walls and crowding near the door. They were watching him with expressions he did not recognize at first. It took him several seconds to understand what he was seeing. Respect. Commander Oz stood at the foot of his bed. All 4 arms crossed over his massive chest. The mockery was gone from his face. The easy confidence was gone. He looked at Danny the way he might look at a superior officer or perhaps something more. "The doctors say you should be dead," H said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "They say your body took enough damage to kill 3 humans. Your heart stopped twice during surgery. Your lungs collapsed. Half your bones were broken." He paused. "They say it is a miracle you are still alive." Danny tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. A young medic hurried forward and gave him water. He drank slowly, then tried again. "Miracles have nothing to do with it," he said. His voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. Oz leaned closer. "Then explain it to me. I have watched the footage 17 times. I have shown it to every tactician on this ship. None of them can explain how you did what you did. You should have died in the first minute. You should have died in the first hour. Every time I watch that footage, I see a moment where any soldier should have fallen. And every time you keep fighting." Danny closed his eyes. "Have you ever heard of a place called Thermopylae?" Silence. "It was a battle on Earth thousands of years ago. A small group of soldiers held a narrow pass against an army of hundreds of thousands. They knew they were going to die. They fought anyway. They held the line for days, giving their people time to prepare. When they finally fell, they had become something more than soldiers. They had become a legend." He opened his eyes and looked at us. "That is one of the myths you laughed at. 300 warriors against an empire. It sounds impossible. It sounds like a fantasy told to children." Oz said nothing, but it happened. Danny continued. "It really happened. Not exactly the way the stories say, but close enough. Humans have been doing the impossible for as long as we have existed. We have charged into machine gun fire for patches of mud. We have held bridges against armies. We have crawled through frozen wastelands and burning deserts and kept going when everything said we should stop." He tried to sit up. Pain shot through his body, but he ignored it. "You want to know how I survived? You want to know why I kept fighting when my body was broken and my weapons were gone?" Every eye in the room was fixed on him. "Because that is what humans do. That is what we have always done. The myths you laughed at are not fantasies. They are memories. Every story of a hero fighting gods and monsters. Every legend of a warrior who refused to die. Every tale of someone who held the line against impossible odds. Those are not wishes. Those are records of what our ancestors actually did." He looked around the room at the faces of the aliens who had mocked him, who had him, who had dismissed his entire species as weak and fragile and insignificant. Hercules killing a lion with his bare hands. That is a story about how the first humans survived in a world full of predators. Odysseus tricking a giant. That is a story about how we used our minds when our bodies were not enough. Warriors returning from the underworld. Those are stories about soldiers who survived wounds that should have killed them, who came back from places of death and horror and kept fighting. His voice grew stronger, fed by something deeper than physical strength. You think we invented these stories because we are weak, but you have it backward. We tell these stories because they are true. We tell them to our children so they will know what is possible. So they will know that when everything seems lost, when the enemy is stronger and faster and there is no hope, a human can still win. Not through strength, not through speed, through something you do not have a word for. He paused. We call it heart, or will, or stubbornness. It does not matter what you call it. What matters is that it cannot be beaten. It cannot be broken. You can destroy our bodies, but you cannot destroy our spirit. You can take everything from us, and we will still find a way to fight. Oz stared at him for a long moment. Then he asked the question that everyone in the room wanted to ask. Why? Why do you fight so hard? Why did you risk your life for soldiers who are not even your own species? Danny smiled. It was a tired smile, the smile of a man who had answered this question many times before. Because they were mine to protect. Because I made a promise. Because that is what humans do. He lay back against his pillow, exhausted. You break our bodies and we fight with our minds. You break our minds and we fight with our hearts. You want to stop a human from protecting something they love. He shook his head slowly. You cannot. The room was completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Then slowly, Commander Oz did something that no had ever done in the presence of a human. He bowed his head in respect. One by one, the others followed, and Danny Vance, the old soldier who had done the impossible one more time, closed his eyes and finally allowed himself to rest. 3 weeks later, the Void's Edge limped back to Coalition space for repairs. The ship was battered, but it had survived. More importantly, its crew had survived. All 12 soldiers in the medical bay were alive because of what Danny Vance had done. Word spread through the fleet like fire. At first, people did not believe it. A single human, an old combat medic, had held off 14 shock troops for 6 hours. It sounded like exactly the kind of myth that aliens had laughed at for years. It sounded impossible. Then the footage leaked. Within days, every soldier in the coalition had seen it. They watched Danny fighting in the red-lit corridor, his body breaking piece by piece, his weapons running out one by one. They watched him beat to death with a fire extinguisher. They watched him stand in front of that door with nothing but a makeshift spear and refuse to move. They watched him whisper the names of his children as he prepared to die. The laughter stopped when the Void's Edge arrived at the Coalition station. Danny was still recovering in the medical bay. He could walk now, though slowly, and the doctors said he would make a full recovery in time. His body had been rebuilt with advanced alien medicine, but the scars remained. He had asked them to leave the scars. He said they were reminders of promises he had kept. Commander Oz came to see him on the day before Danny was scheduled to transfer to another ship. The warrior stood in the doorway of the medical bay, his 4 arms hanging loose at his sides. I have submitted a request to Fleet Command, Oz said. I have asked that human units be assigned to all critical defensive positions in the Coalition fleet. Danny looked up from the book he was reading. Why? Because I have learned something. I stepped into the room and sat down in a chair that was too small for him. I have learned that the strongest walls are not made of steel. They are made of soldiers who will not move, and humans are the best at not moving. Danny smiled slightly. We have had a lot of practice, so I understand now. Oz leaned forward. The stories, the myths, I understand what they really are. They are not fantasies. They are warnings. Warnings, yes. Warnings to anyone who thinks humans can be beaten. Warnings to anyone who underestimates what your species is capable of. Every story of a human hero doing the impossible is a message. This has happened before, and it can happen again. Danny nodded slowly. That is exactly right. We tell our children these stories so they will know that when everything falls apart, when there is no hope, when the enemy is at the gates, a human can still find a way. Not because we are special, not because we have magic powers, but because we have ancestors who did it before us and their blood runs in our veins. As was quiet for a moment, The fleet will be different now. The other species are looking at humans in a new way. Some of them are frightened. Some of them are amazed. All of them are asking the same question. What question? What else are you capable of? What other impossible things have humans done that we dismissed as myths? Danny closed his book and set it aside. That is a question with a very long answer, Commander. Humans have been doing impossible things since before we had words to describe them. We have climbed mountains that should have killed us. We have crossed oceans in boats that should have sunk. We have survived diseases that should have ended our species. We have built civilizations in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. He looked at us with calm, steady eyes. We have done all of this not because we are the strongest, or the fastest, or the weakest. We have done it because we do not know how to quit. It is not a choice. It is not a strategy. It is simply who we are. Later that day, Danny walked through the station to his new assignment. The corridors were crowded with soldiers from dozens of species, all of them busy with their own duties. But as he passed, something strange happened. They stopped. They turned. They watched him walk by with expressions of wonder and respect. A young officer hurried up beside him. It was the same one who had mocked human myths in the mess hall all those weeks ago. She looked different now. The arrogance was gone from her face, replaced by something like hunger. "Corporal Vance," she said, "I wanted to apologize for the things I said about human myths. I did not understand." Danny kept walking. "No need to apologize. You were not wrong about the facts. Humans are fragile. Our lives are short. Our bodies break easily." He glanced at her. "But facts are not the whole story. I know that now." Walked beside him in silence for a moment. "Could you tell me more about your myths, about the things your ancestors did?" Danny stopped. He looked at the genuine curiosity in her dark eyes, and he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. "There was a woman named," he said. "She was born into slavery, treated as property, valued only for her labor. She escaped. Then she went back again and again to lead others to freedom. She could have been caught. She could have been killed, but she kept going back, listened with wide eyes. There was a man named Ernest who survived a plane crash in Africa, and a boat wreck in the ocean, and multiple wars, and wounds that should have killed him 10 times over. He wrote stories about courage and endurance and the human spirit." Danny smiled. "There was a nurse named who worked in enemy territory saving soldiers from both sides of a war. They executed her for it before she died. She said that patriotism was not enough, that she must have no hatred in her heart." He looked at, "These are not myths. These are real people who did real things, and there are thousands more like them, millions. Every generation, every culture, every corner of our world has produced humans who did the impossible." A small crowd had gathered around them, soldiers from different species listening to the humans speak. "That is our legacy." Danny said, "That is what we carry with us. Not weapons or technology or physical strength. We carry the memory of everyone who came before us, everyone who faced the darkness and refused to give up." He started walking again, and the crowd parted for him. At the end of the corridor, a young human private was waiting. Her name was Brooks, fresh from Earth, barely 20 years old. She had a scar on her forearm, pale and jagged against her brown skin. Approached her. "What happened to your arm?" Looked at her surprised. Then she smiled. "That is a long story," she said. "You want to hear it?" Nodded eagerly. And somewhere in the depths of space, aboard ships and stations across the coalition, other species began to listen. They gathered around humans in mess halls and barracks and corridors, asking to hear the stories they had once mocked. They wanted to know about the impossible things humans had done. They wanted to understand the fire that burned in human hearts, because they had finally learned the truth. Human myths were not exaggerations. They were not fantasies. They were not dreams of what could be. They were warnings. And the galaxy was only beginning to understand what humans were capable of.